is Ken Heck, Executive Director of our Food Policy Advocates Council.
Thanks. First thing I'd like to do is to thank you for holding this panel today. As Pat said, there's no better way to prevent obesity than through the school meal programs. And as other people have said, with clamping down on competitive food, we're really driving kids toward the USDA reimbursable meal. So that's the meal we've got to look at, and that's what we've been doing today. It's just the right subject at the right time in the right place. And in addition to Paul and Linnell, I'd like to acknowledge Robert Schramm and Jeff Davison in the audience. They are great food service directors, and I hope you'll have an opportunity to talk to them before you get out of here. They've done some absolutely remarkable things. I will leave my goal statement to be submitted later because we're sort of running out of time, and hop right to the challenges and solutions, if I may. As Pat said, this meal is critical to kids' health. Therefore, the first order of business is to make sure that all the kids get the meal. There are 25% of the schools in the state that still do not serve breakfast. We have legislation moving as we speak so that Phyllis's people are identifying schools that have high concentrations of low-income kids and who therefore can get higher reimbursement for their school breakfast program. I think consensus has formed that those schools ought to serve breakfast, and we ought to make sure that moves along this year. And then we ought to take a look at all the other schools that are not up to severe need level of reimbursement and see which of those schools could readily go on to the school breakfast program without financial hardship. Last thing in the world we want to do is louse up a school food service program, but we want to see as many kids fed as possible. If you have the program on site, then the next question is, are the kids participating? And as we all know, excuse me, there are problems with breakfast participation. Phyllis has been banging away at breakfast participation as long as she's been in the job. Most of the food service directors here in this room doing exactly the same thing. If you look at this video, you will see Robert Schramm, star of stage, screen, and video, show you the remarkable progress that you can make with breakfast in the classroom in elementary schools and using grab-and-go carts in the middle and senior high schools. It's fantastic. It isn't magic. It takes a lot of hard work, but it gets participation up from where it is, which is about 18 to 20% of the kids who go to school, very close to 100% when there's classroom breakfast. I was down in San Diego a couple of weeks ago, went to a school down there with over 900 kids. Their breakfast participation had been less than 150. They were going broke on breakfast. They moved it into the classroom in order to remain solvent. The participation is now over 900, and the teachers are ecstatic. It gets those kids ready to learn for the most important part of their day. Lunch is sort of trickling along at 50% of our kids. The kids told the story better than I could, so I'll be very brief. I thought they were fantastic. Next time you do a panel, no one over 20. There is a problem with facilities. There is not a place for kids to eat. In Berkeley High, where Ann Cooper is doing a wonderful job with the food, she has 3,000 kids to feed in 34 minutes. The message from that is we've got to send the kids out into the town to eat junk food. And I don't think that's really what we want to do. The kids themselves were talking about, the students were talking about closing campus, doing whatever they needed to do to keep kids to eat attractive, nourishing food, and that's what we need to work toward. Food quality. Of course, the problem includes reimbursement, and the reimbursement not only ought to go up, but it ought to be indexed to make sure it stays up. Second is the facilities problem that I mentioned before. The facilities problem is one for finding places for kids to eat. It's also finding places for food to be cooked so that human beings would like to eat it. Some of our schools don't permit that. What they're requiring is that food be heated and served. And some of the heat and serve food is as good as it can get, but it is not the same as scratch cooking. So we would encourage you to look very carefully at that. Don't let schools be remodeled in a way that eliminates that space. See if there isn't room for some startup grants for people who have that space to return some equipment. It could be used equipment, so they can do some of the cooking on site and see that the new schools that get built have space for cooking as well as for eating. More fruits and vegetables. I think as a result of the work that's been done in the last year or two, there is consensus forming. I don't think it's there yet, but it's very close on some of the things that ought to be done to accompany this new reimbursement, which the governor seems absolutely committed to providing. And some of those items are listed there in the veto message to Senator Murray's bill. More fruits and vegetables. More whole grains. Out with the trans fats, just the same as Kentucky Fried Chicken. If they can do it, we can do it. And out with the deep frying, and probably with frying altogether. There is a state where they're now eliminating frying altogether and cooking by all other methods, so the kids get used to that. And it may not be something that you can introduce to kids in the last year of high school, but if you start it in the elementary schools and bring it along, the kids will, as we heard them say earlier this morning, eat healthy food. In addition to those items which I think there really is consensus for, both among the experts and among those who are making decisions politically in California, there are some pretty obvious changes. One has to do with liquids. There are schools in California without drinking water for children. I don't think we should send kids to schools without drinking water. Also important, not just in terms of our respect for the kids, but in terms of obesity prevention. It's no surprise that they're drinking things out of vending machines if they can't get free drinking water on campus. Milk, we want to make sure that all the milk is 1% or non-fat. And as Dr. Crawford says, we need to get the sweeteners out of the milk so the kids don't get their sweet tastes reinforced. Milk doesn't have to be chocolate and strawberry. There ought to be special reimbursement, in addition to all the other kinds of reimbursement that we've talked about, special reimbursement to encourage scratch cooking. We need to ask USDA to help get the DoD Fresh program working better. In some school districts it seems to work well and we need to expand it. In other districts it is not working well. Somebody needs to take a look at that, because that's potentially free food for school districts to make it work right. There needs to be nutrition education. We haven't talked much about that today, but I know everybody here believes in it. But if we're introducing new foods, if we're introducing new ways to eat, we need to help the kids and their families understand what that's all about. Otherwise it won't stick. And finally, there needs to be training to the remarkable unsung heroes, as I think Paul mentioned so eloquently. The folks who work in food service, for the most part, have a very thankless job. It's a really hard job and a really critical job. And as we ask them to take on newer, harder, and I think better tasks in cooking food, not just heating up food, we need to help them gain the skills to do that well. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ken. Next, please, and then to some general discussion to have our last panelist, E.D. Jessup.
Thank you. I'll be rather quick as we are behind. I want to make sure that I acknowledge that Manuel Nunez from the Board of Trustees for Fresno Unified is here, and I really appreciate his being here to learn more about it, and hope that he will pass on all that he has learned today to his colleagues. I'm E.D. Jessup. I work with Fresno Metro Ministry, and we have worked very hard with Paul and others on the wellness policy, and I want to recommend the wellness policies that all schools have had to adopt as an important way to engage the community. And engaging the community in supporting, and they do support, having schools be the place for really fine food for our children. And, you know, tell us what you need in that way, and we can rally that support because it's really essential. Public school is the equalizer. It is the place where kids should have equal access and equal opportunity for really good, healthy food, and the communities will be happy to support that. A Hmong mother told me, "The schools are teaching my children to eat poorly," recognizing that school is where children learn. and it is where our adults learn, and it's where our communities learn what is the standard for our good health and our civic engagement. And that we have kids going to school without really good food is really important. That we fix that, we know it costs money, and as people have said, that this is where the obesity epidemic can be solved. I had a request from someone in the audience who had to leave that schools are the place where we can really begin to look at cultural appropriateness also. Our demographics have changed since we were putting mashed potatoes and mystery meat on the table. And our ethnic growers are very interested in vending. And I know that Jeff Davidson is buying Asian produce, and the kids are very proud to know what it is that they are eating and know that it is healthy. And so that cultural competence that needs to come along with offering meals is really important. The urgency of disease by diet means that we cannot leave this be. We have to do it, and we have to do it now. We can do it, because guess what? There's plenty of food. The other part is that schools increasingly are engaging preschools on their campuses as a way of getting kids ready. And this means that we have the ability, through our wellness policies and what we serve, to start kids off in school right. And it is the place to begin, and so it makes it even more important. Policy is important for that reason. Because of our wellness policy, I was told that the preschool director for Fresno Unified this year required that the Halloween parties in preschool be healthy. And they had to have healthy food. And she said, this is the first year I could do it because I had a policy to back me up. The importance of legislation and it being a tool for good health for kids is really important. I would love to have you consider the infrastructure needs. I think since Prop 13 we have defunded our schools to the extent that we have a mess. And the legislature needs to pony up here and fix things a little bit and get the stream of funding back into supporting our schools so we have equal opportunity for all our kids. I would also like you to consider making schools the point for healthy meals being available to kids 365 days a year. And how that would work, we know that we have summer meals and that can even go all year round in terms of federal reimbursement. But for many of our kids, when they're out of school, they no longer have access to a healthy meal and a healthy opportunity. Lastly, I think that you would have support with parents for really diminishing the opportunities. Kids have an opportunity after school and on weekends for treats and fun things. And school should be the place where they're learning good nutrition. And I think that that's very important. And one more thing, I'm sorry, I keep going on. I'm really interested in the Department of Defense options. Why we do not have a hub for rescuing the good produce that is here in the valley and make that the place that it emanates from and becomes a real resource locally and a resource for folks is really crazy. There are some good models. I've talked to A.G. Kawamura about this, but a partnering of the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Defense to make this work instead of not work, I think could make a really big difference for our schools. So, improvement and universality are the last things I would say to you. And good luck, and I really appreciate, again, your having this.
Thank you, Edie, and to each and every one of you. And I'm going to ask a few questions with the time we have before we ask for public comment, but an outstanding panel with excellent ideas. Everything from your admonition about money, Superintendent Jack O'Connell and I would be on the very same page, as that the state is neglectfully underfunded education over the course of many years, and a major reversal over the last 4 years. So we have a real challenge there, because I believe when the adequacy study is out, and I hope the adequacy study, by the way, and I'm going to check on this, we should ask Superintendent O'Connell to see if the adequacy study is also looking at the school meal reimbursement and the nutrition side. But what they are looking at, HP and a number of other foundations have funded a look at California and our standards, our academic standards, and what it will take to educate our youth in different demographic subsections of California to meet those standards. And it may be $7,000 a year for certain students, but for English language learners or students whose parents have never graduated from high school, it may be $13,000 a year. What is the real price tag to meet world-class competitive standards on an academic side? And those analyses should include the meals. We're talking about the universality of those meals. And I'm thinking it's $5 to $7 billion that we're short annually to fund the schools of California to meet those global standards. And if we don't meet our own standards, then the debate is, if we're not meeting with current funding, what do you do? And I think that there's two answers. One, you step up and you fund, and that would be my choice. The other is, well, we can't meet the standards, so we're going to need to lower the standards because we have this huge mismatch, and we'll relegate ourselves down to Mississippi and Alabama in terms of academic performance. And that, I don't think, is a very palatable decision. It's not one really the voters and the people of California, I think, would want to embrace. But that's the challenge that will be in front of us, and I think we need to double check as to whether they've really included a budget item in that quality education of the meals. I like the idea of benchmarking, indexing the increase. We had talked about that in coming down to prepare for this hearing, that we shouldn't just have to scramble and have a big war every 10 or 15 years to increase the meal reimbursement. And that would, I think, give schools a longer range ability to plan the improvements, the tapering in of some of the quality and purchasing of some of the choices that may be more expensive. If they knew there was going to be a cost of living increase the next year, they would be better able to make a decision to go to more attractive packaging or more attractive presentation. The Kiwi connection, I appreciate that, and again, always keeping in mind the students that we're serving as the customers. And Paul mentioned also when we were visiting with Karen in the back here today, we have the standards, we have a good meal, I enjoyed it this morning. I did see a lot of apples end up in the garbage can, unfortunately, because while we have the standard and we're compliant as the tray comes off the counter there, it's maybe too much, it's not the right way. Can we get the apple sliced in some other way that the students can more readily enjoy them and not toss them in the garbage can? So we have that kind of the Kiwi connection is how do you actually present the food in a way that the students will want to eat it. I'm going to ask you to answer briefly a little bit further, but then each of you, from your excellent backgrounds, look at how to put something in writing that we could use as a springboard for hearings in Sacramento on this. I think we need to move quickly in the new year to get the legislation and that will approve the 21 cents, but go beyond that and look at the indexing and some of the other issues. And I finally wanted to say before asking the question, the idea of treating the school lunch program and the association of the general challenge of diabetes and obesity as an inoculation mechanism. So for measles and tetanus and polio, we line up and make sure that the kids get the shots, and that's standard operating procedure. You don't even think twice about it because we want to prevent disease. But here we have the chance in the school meals in the lunchbox to make that difference in an inoculating way. Here's a question: just how does the CDE, what does CDE need or think is needed to bring about reimbursement up to a COLA, and what is the thinking then in the department about some kind of an indexing or new method of calculating when and how to increase the meal reimbursements?
We asked for $70 million last year, which was to give districts the money that they would need for basically the COLA they hadn't been provided since 1990. So it raised the reimbursement rate for free and reduced, but it also then restored reimbursement for the paid child, which The analogy that we draw is with math standards. We don't adopt math standards and then only give districts money for the low-income kids to get the new textbooks, and we just expect districts to absorb the cost of providing new textbooks for their middle-income kids. So we've implemented SB 12 and 965. We know from the very excellent evaluation that UC Berkeley did that it suggested that there was going to be some additional cost, and that what we're seeing in districts across the state that are implementing the standards, if they have a relatively high proportion of free and reduced kids, they're making more money from the meal reimbursement, but if they have relatively low free and reduced, they're not. So again, that reimbursement for the pay child, we think, is absolutely critical. So we thought $70 million was the package that was needed for that. We think indexing is a great idea. I do believe that was part of SB 1674, the bill that was moving forward. So that's what we think is a good number.
I think the high number is totally appropriate. And again, I like the indexing concept. I think that's essential.
Let me add just one footnote to what Phyllis has said, which may be unpopular, I hope not. The ratio of state to federal reimbursement means that the federal reimbursement is really the driver. It's 10 to 1, 11 to 1, something like that. So the state funding is absolutely indispensable, but it's not enough, and the federal funding has to go up and keep being indexed as well. Some of the state money may be better spent on one-time shots, startup money, non-recurring costs, the kind of thing that a state budget can afford in good years and bad, as opposed to getting overly dependent upon the state for continuous funding. It's a different kind of cycle from, or a different situation from normal education funding, where the state really plays the driving role. In food, that's not so.
In the governor's veto message, I think we have to understand that bill was vetoed, and so there's going to need to be, and I think you said it can, but I think we all recognize in some form we need to be responsive to some of the goals that the governor set out that he would like to see, and some of it, as Phyllis just said, is really already achieved, and how do you link further achievement towards the goals that are already law to receiving the additional funding. And so I want us to be creative in terms of thinking how do we be responsive, and the trans fat issue is sort of a new one, but a good one to address. Even was mentioned, should we have some kind of review that each school district does of their open or closed campus policy, the competitive foods and snacks, and what other ways can we, more than tinker, but we can adjust what we're doing to be even more thorough in terms of channeling students to the good school lunch program, as well as making it more attractive. To Linnell and Paul, in your districts, how many campuses are open campuses where the students have a choice to walk off campus?
All 4 of my high schools are open campus.
If they were closed, would you have enough capacity?
I'm good, I could do it.
You could do it. Okay, Linnell could do it.
I think that's really where where districts will struggle, is if you don't have them somewhat open, whether it's maybe the juniors and seniors or however they're doing it, the facilities that you have and the time periods that you have to do it in, I'm not quite sure you could feed them all.
But it could be that tied into the legislation is each district should review its open campus policy, and to see if it has the capacity, should they consider closing it in order to bring more students into the program to make it more economical. And to the degree that students, the particular high school in Berkeley High was mentioned, is impacted to the degree that they're trying to serve 3,000 students in a half hour, 45 minutes, that school needs an open campus policy, probably because there's not a lot of other alternatives. Edie?
I would also say in the transition, because I think going to closed campuses is smart and healthy, but I think that there's a side on the community side where some zoning and ordinances that perhaps would allow for, if there was going to be fast food or accessible food to students, that it be healthy food. And that could happen.
Local action again, but guided through some state direction perhaps.
I just really want to add that there are some interim steps that can be taken between having one lunch period one 25-minute lunch period expecting to serve 3,000 kids and then having an open campus. What many schools do, many don't, is maybe have 3 or 4 lunch periods. Sometimes people really don't want to look at that. There's taking that to the extreme. We do have some districts or some schools that are starting to serve lunch at 10 o'clock and end at 2, but within that middle ground, there's ways that scheduling can happen that you can move more kids through without, an interim basis, without necessarily having to expand the cafeteria or eating area.
I think what many of you have mentioned, and this could be another area for that, just what you said, is some of the dollars for implementing good ideas, the training dollars to the cafeteria staff, some consulting help perhaps to districts to enable them to look at those options. Here's some scheduling patterns that have worked in other districts, so if we did require as part of the legislation some kind of review of the open campus or the scheduling of too tight, too overcrowded of a meal hour, we would be better served, I guess, if we had some good capability that maybe housed in CDE, Department of Education, that could assist districts in looking at those alternative schedules. Now, a bigger district as we have here in Fresno, that's great. And you mentioned, Linnell, there's a whole bunch of districts that are 3,000 and less student population. Having some consulting capability as part of the legislation to help those districts meet the goals optimally may make a lot of sense. Well, you guys have been excellent. Any further comments you have? And I'd like to ask you all to put something in writing further. Excellent presentation today. Let's hear it for this panel and all the panels. They did a great job today. Thank you. We appropriately have a public comment period, and we want to hear from some of the good representatives who are here, who have done work in these fields and these challenges. And we have until 11 o'clock, and then the lunch stampede will come here. So we'll need to wrap up in about 10, 12 minutes. So I'm going to ask first to come up Connie Schneider, Project Lean, UC Cooperative Extension, who did the Kiwi study or worked with Paul here in Fresno on the Kiwi study. Welcome.
Thank you. And actually the panelists gave such great recommendations. I'm speaking for Alyssa Walling, Project Lean Coordinator, and myself. We agree with all the recommendations. Senator, you had mentioned about getting parents involved, and I did want to tell you that in a lot of the schools in these communities in Central Valley, parents are involved in different ways. Here in Fresno County, UC Cooperative Extension does have adult nutrition programs, and we partner with schools like Hidalgo and other schools, and we do teach parents and parent groups. Most of our parents are low income, either Latino and Hmong. And to echo Edie Jessup's statements, is often they tell us that, they're being taught by their children because the children are becoming acculturalized to the foods, and they are not the healthful foods. But in some of our feedback that we get from pre and post testing, after an 8-week course of our nutrition classes, over half of our parents report that their children are now eating breakfast where they didn't before. And over 2/3 are now increasing their fruit and vegetables, and they are learning to limit and budget their funds so they're not running out of money at the end of the month. So if we combine teaching with parents as we do with children in the schools, we can be successful.
Thank you very much, Connie. I really appreciate the work UC Cooperative Extension does, and I think there could be some other partnerships we mentioned in terms of the training and consulting that could go on. Joe Herzog is next from the California Association of Health and Physical Education, Recreation and Dance. Joe, welcome.
Thank you, and I want to thank you particularly and the remarkable staff you have for hosting this hearing today. We know that you've done a lot to promote physical activity and physical education. Also, I want to say that in Fresno, we have a remarkable support staff with the UC Cooperative Extension, Fresno State Kinesiology Department, Fresno County Office of Education, and our school board members with Manuel Nunez at the forefront of that leadership. And it really does give us hope that better things are in the future. As as valuable and important and absolutely crucial as nutrition is, if we don't